This is the Tending the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Maggie Hollenbeck. I'm a psychotherapist, writer, teacher, and an avid student of happiness. I'm just thrilled that we're here together. This podcast is all about mental health, how to heal it, protect it, and enjoy it. I'm excited to share what I've learned in my 20 plus years working in the field. If you want to take a more active role in cultivating stubborn gladness in your life and tending to yourself when the world hits you hard, this is the place for you. Let's dive in. Welcome back. I am so glad you're here. Today, let's talk about trauma. Why not? Let's get into it. I'm going to talk today about 4 pieces of this subject. I'm going to go over what even is trauma, sort of a working definition today, and how do I define it when I am working with my clients. Second, I'm going to talk with you about my framework for viewing the way that trauma acts in the nervous system as a sort of digestive issue. And this actually, unbeknownst to me, already existed in an Indian medical model called Ayurveda. I didn't know that at the time that I started using this framework with clients, but I love that there is something out there that matches that. And then third and fourth, I want to talk about the difference between recognizing and recovering from a trauma, from an acute or a chronic trauma, and then the difference between recovery and the preventative work that we can do to build more resilience in our nervous systems, in our bodies and our brains, so that we are more trauma resilient, so to speak. So let's go back to the very beginning and start with what even is trauma. The definition of trauma has, like I said, has evolved over time. The word itself comes from the Greek language, and it literally means wound. And trauma is something that can manifest physically in terms of a physical wound from a car accident or something like that. The type of trauma that I deal with as a psychotherapist is the mental and emotional trauma, which can sometimes happen along with a physical trauma and sometimes not. So to be as plain as we can about it, a trauma is an experience that causes a shock or an overwhelm or a wound to our bodies, our minds, our emotions, or our spirit. What makes it a trauma is not necessarily the event, but our response to it, which I think is part of why this term has been evolving over time. When the term first started to be used about, let's say, 150, 170 years ago, it was very much tied to certain experiences, and it was given a narrow definition at that time. There wasn't an explicit definition, but I think it implicitly had a bit of a narrow definition to it. And most people would say on the surface of it that a trauma is something extraordinarily difficult and maybe rare, something like war or rape or witnessing a murder or something that is really very clearly trauma. There's a couple of problems with that definition, though. One problem is that by narrowing it so much, it has created a bit of a tendency in us. This is a human trait. We compare our insides with other people's outsides. And what I mean by that is we compare our inner experience with only our understanding from the outside of another person's inner experience, right? And most often we don't really have the full picture of what someone's inner experience is just by witnessing their outer life. But we do love to compare. We are comparing creatures. And often we compare in order to differentiate ourselves. And what will often happen with trauma is that if we compare our experience to a definition that we think is very narrow and focused on extraordinary experiences, then we very often are going to say, we didn't experience something that bad, and so it's not a trauma. I don't know that is really helpful because, like I said, what really differentiates a trauma from a non-traumatic experience is not so much the experience itself, but our response or our reaction to it. So again, two people may experience the same shocking, extraordinary, or even ordinary experience, and one person may find themselves traumatized by it and another person may not. And that would have to do, again, not with the experience, but with the way that experience is being absorbed by the person, the way that it's being experienced by the person. The trauma response is actually what differentiates a trauma from a non-trauma. And I think that's important because experience is subjective. If someone feels traumatized by something that happened to them, that needs to be respected. That can be explored, but it needs to be respected and then dealt with accordingly. So, what are the elements of an experience that is traumatizing? I'm going to talk about the way that I frame trauma as an experience as a digestive issue, a digestive upset. So, the way that I explain trauma to my clients is as a problem of absorption and digestion. Every day we have experiences all throughout the day. We brush our teeth, we drive on the freeway, we have lunch with a friend, we get into a fight with the person at the grocery store over the last carton of milk. And of course, we have much more upsetting experiences as well. But all of those experiences, literally, the way that we absorb our experiences is through our senses. All of our senses are tied to our nervous system. So our nervous system is absorbing all of this information, right? All of the sights, all of the sounds, all of the taste, the smell, the feel of the air around you, the temperature in the air, like everything, right? We're taking all of that in. And there is a part of the brain back near the brainstem that is responsible for digesting all that experience. It works very much like our gut works with food. So when that experience is coming into our system, this part of the brain that's responsible for digesting is doing just that. It is pulling that experience apart, pulling all that information apart, and holding on to what is nutritive and letting go of what is not. Obviously, we cannot remember everything about every experience. We would be overwhelmed, and it's not really necessary. But just like food coming into our digestive system gets broken down and pulled apart, and the nutritive pieces get shuttled into the body, and the stuff that we don't need gets let go. The same is happening with our experiences all day long. Our nervous system is so efficient at this. What seems to happen when we experience something traumatizing is that it creates a shock to that part of the brain that is responsible for digesting the information. And all of that experience is still getting stuffed in through the senses, but the digestive system has gone offline, basically. It's been short-circuited. And so that experience overwhelms the system, the nervous system, and it doesn't ever get digested, doesn't get pulled apart. It doesn't get the unnecessary stuff weeded out and so forth. And so it stays just stuck in the system. And if you think about that as the way you would think about food getting stuck in the system, undigested, the same sort of thing. What happens over time is that material becomes a problem. If it's not digested, it can stay just stuck in the system, free floating. It might start to rot. It might start to become toxic in the system. And, what's the answer for that? If we have a digestive upset in our gut, then the answer is to introduce probiotics and maybe flush through the system in order to get things moving again, in order to move that material along so that the body can do with it what it needs to do in order for it to not be harmful. By the same token, a lot of what I do in terms of the trauma treatment piece, and there are things that any of us can do at any time, is finding ways to bring that digestive system back online and to complete the digestion, absorption, integration of that experience so that our systems no longer have to be overwhelmed by it and no longer have to grapple over and over with digesting it. I see a lot of the post-traumatic stress symptoms as efforts that our body and brain are making to try to digest that experience after the fact. If you think about the various types of post-traumatic stress symptoms, flashbacks, nightmares, replaying it in your head, all of those things are, I think, efforts that our brain and body are making to digest this undigested material. I look for ways to help that process along, because just like food, when it's properly digested, it actually becomes part of our body, right? It's not really nutrients. Where are the nutrients in our body anymore? After a time, they become absorbed, integrated into the tissues, and they actually literally become a part of our body. By the same token, all of our experiences make up the whole of who we are. And every single experience can be nutritive, even if it was an unwanted experience. And I realize that might feel oversimplified, that if you have gone through a particularly harrowing traumatic experience, you might take exception to that, to me saying that. I will step out of my role as a therapist for a second and step into my role as someone who has gone through kinds of experience that pretty much anybody would consider traumatic. And today, because of the work that I have done over the years, I can very much say that my traumatic experiences have played a big part in me becoming who I am. And even though they were unwanted, I don't know if I would change anything about the way my life has unfolded. I find that to be a helpful and empowering stance for myself, and a stance that I only was able to take for myself after doing trauma work. I think that part of recovery is being able to feel more empowered to choose how you want to relate to the experiences in your life. And when those experiences are still overwhelming, still undigested, still disintegrated from yourself, it's a whole lot harder to make those choices. So let's talk about ways to help your nervous system to recover after trauma. Again, what we want to focus on are ways to help your nervous system to digest the experience. So in my therapy work with clients, I use some tools and some methods that are professional level tools, things that I have trained in over the years, but are essentially ways to help various parts of your nervous system to process material. Two of my favorite tools are brainspotting and EFT, emotional freedom technique, also known as tapping. Brainspotting is a brain-based trauma treatment that works very specifically to help the digestive system, I call it, in the back of the brain, to come online and to digest, process, integrate those experiences through a process of focused mindfulness and bilateral stimulation. I love all these terms. EFT or tapping is a self-administered acupressure technique that can help your energy system, which is part of your nervous system, to get the experience unstuck through particular channels in your energy system called meridians. So those are two techniques that I use quite often with clients in session. If you're not working with a therapist, or even if you are working with a therapist, there are things that you can do in your own life to help digest. One method that I think is very helpful for recovering and integrating after a trauma is journaling, writing, particularly writing by hand, and having your eyes on that page as you're writing. There is something very integrative about that practice. Your hand is actually making the language, and your eyes are witnessing that language making and telling the story, putting a narrative to it. There is something in that is utilizing the mind and the body together in a way to process and digest the experience. So I would not underestimate the power of journaling. A way to even make that more powerful is to read some of your story to someone that you really trust. And again, that can be a therapist, that could be a close trusted friend, that could be a spiritual fellow seeker, someone in a spiritual community, if you're in one, like a sangha or a church community, to read it, but particularly to read it a few times in a row. There is something about that process that allows your nervous system to digest it, not just reading it once, but reading it 2 or 3 times in succession, with the other person just being a witness and not offering any feedback, just witnessing. So there are ways to literally help your system to digest. Going for a walk can be very helpful, in particular because it creates something in your nervous system called bilateral stimulation. The hemispheres of the brain connect to each side of the body. Your left brain connects to the right side of your body. Your right brain connects to the left side of your body. And when the two hemispheres of the brain are stimulated alternately, back and forth, left, right, that helps the back of the brain to come online and process. When we do brain spotting, another trauma treatment, EMDR, also uses bilateral stimulation. EMDR uses generally eye movement or tapping this way. Brain spotting tends to use music that is specifically engineered to rock back and forth from ear to ear. But you know what? Walking also creates natural bilateral stimulation in your body because you're swinging your left arm and your right leg at the same time, your right arm and your left leg at the same time, and you are actually bringing both hemispheres of the brain online, which helps with whole brain processing. So going for a walk can be really helpful. I am a huge fan of the bilateral music that we use in brain spotting sessions, and I often encourage my clients to put that music in your ears and go for a walk. I will actually include a link in the show notes to a free 60-minute track for bilateral music. So that's the recovery piece. That's after trauma. And what I think is important to recognize about yourself is how trauma sensitive or trauma resilient do you think you are? All of us are somewhere on that spectrum innately. Some of us may just have more robust nervous systems that are more resilient. Some of us may be very highly sensitive and have nervous systems that are also highly sensitive and therefore maybe more prone to being traumatized. So again, it's not necessarily about the experience, but how we're taking in the experience or not taking it in. And so there are ways, though, that you can help your nervous system to become more resilient over time. Stress can really overwhelm our systems and make us much less resilient over time if we're not dealing with our stress effectively. So, of course, that can lead to all kinds of problems, right? To anxiety, to depression, to burnout. And it can also lead to post-traumatic stress, being overwhelmed by stress and not having adequate ways to process and digest our everyday stress will obviously make us more susceptible to having a trauma response when we have an experience that creates that shock to the system. So there are also practices that can really help you to to make your nervous system more resilient to all kinds of stress, including trauma, which ultimately is a type of stress, albeit at maybe one end of the spectrum, right? At a more extreme end of the spectrum. So, what are the things that you do on a regular basis in order to make your nervous system as healthy and resilient as possible? Obviously, sleep and exercise are really like the basics, right? Like the fundamentals, that's the word. Those are fundamental practices that we can always tend to. We can always kind of look back to, okay, how is my sleep these days? Am I getting any exercise? When we are adequately rested and when our bodies are adequately moved, all of that helps the digestive system, right? Just like it helps our gut, it also helps our brain and our nervous system. Do you have any kind of reflective practice, a way to digest your everyday experiences? I am a huge fan of morning pages or journaling. Morning pages are a specific type of journaling that were made popular by Julia Cameron in her book, The Artist's Way. It is essentially 3 pages of longhand stream of consciousness writing that you do every morning. I think that that is a great practice for keeping our systems clear, keep the channel clear, right? Keep the channel open and clear. Those of you listening who know me will not be a bit surprised to hear me say that meditation is an incredibly helpful way to make your nervous system more resilient. There are various types of meditation. There's actually 3 buckets of meditation. There is a focused mindfulness, there's open monitoring, and then there's self-transcending. Focused mindfulness has to do with clearing the mind of distractions, clearing the mind of thoughts, and maintaining a single pointed focus. Vipassana, insight meditation is in that bucket. There is open monitoring, which is just monitoring your thoughts from a neutral witnessing stance. And then there is self-transcending. And that is a type of meditation that sort of gets you down below the everyday chatter of your mind and down, like beyond that, down into a deeper state of consciousness, actually a 4th state. There's waking, dreaming, sleeping, and then there's this 4th state of consciousness. Those types of meditation do different things, but all of them are very effective ways to help your nervous system to digest and process and integrate experiences on an everyday basis, on a daily basis, so that you have a bigger window of tolerance for the stress in your life. We all have a baseline of functioning in our lives, right? We're walking along and we're experiencing, we like walk over a rock or we hit a little hill and we come back to our baseline, right? And up here is our ceiling. It's like the limits of what we can tolerate. And if we don't have regular practices to keep us down on this good baseline, our stressful experiences will pile up. And after a while, it's like instead of walking on the ground, it's like we're walking on a pile of trash. And then we're walking on a bigger pile of trash. And then we're walking on top of a huge pile of trash. And what happens is that when we have this pile up of stress that's not being dealt with, that's not being digested regularly, pretty soon we are walking on top of this big pile, and then we are this close to hitting our ceiling all the time. If you're watching the video, you will have seen my hands just make this picture. But just picture that instead of walking down on the floor with a high ceiling, you are over time walking on top of a bigger and bigger pile of unprocessed stress. And then your head is going to hit the ceiling at almost anything eventually, right? And that is what happens when we have so much chronic stress that is not being dealt with, that then it's so easy that like spilled milk, right? We cry over spilled milk, or we might really lose it with our kid over a homework assignment that went missing, or like rage at our boss instead of being able to manage that stress. So also, when we are on top of a big pile of stress like that, then a traumatizing experience is much more likely to just send us right over the top and to send our nervous system into total overwhelm, into a shocked state where it really literally cannot process anything else. I think on some level, we all understand what that feeling is to some degree when we are just like so overloaded that we can't process anymore. But when our systems are prone to that, then it is obviously much more likely that a difficult, upsetting, shocking experience will take us out. I want to bring this to a close for today. I've talked for a long time, but I want to just recap talking about what trauma is, like really thinking about how that works in our systems. Maybe you have thought about some things that have happened to you that you would characterize as traumas, not necessarily because the experience itself is quote unquote a trauma, but because your response or reaction to it was a trauma response. Thinking about trauma as digestive upset and what are the ways that we help our digestive systems to process and digest information. And then looking at some ways that you can put some tools in your arsenal so that when you do have traumatizing experiences, how you can recover from those more quickly and more effectively to bring your whole being back online to digest that experience, to integrate it, to make it a part of your whole story rather than this thing that stays stuck and free floating and consistently getting re-triggered in order to try to get resolved. So what are those things that you can do to help yourself recover? And then finally, what are some practices that you already have in place or that you might like to put into place in order to help make your nervous system more resilient on a day-to-day basis so that you are more likely to be able to respond effectively to what could be traumatizing experiences, to be able to stay online, so to speak, and digest that material and to stay responsive rather than moving into reactive, overwhelmed, blown out place. If you are interested in knowing more about this, or if you're interested in learning some tools, I would love to see you over at my Substack. It is at maggiehollenbeck.substack.com. It's called Tending the Soul. There is an opportunity to just check it out if you want, or to subscribe as a free subscriber, which allows you to get newsletters, get notified of podcast episodes in your email. And then if you also want to support my work and become a paid subscriber, you get access to monthly care packages from me and a live gathering every month. If you want to know even more, if you're realizing that maybe you don't have a lot of tools and practices and you want to know more, please feel free to reach out. You can email me, you can DM me through the Substack app. And later this spring, I will be beta testing my very first course called Healing Everyday Trauma. I am so passionate about helping people to have tools and practices available to them so that they can work through upsetting experiences like these and have a more resilient system in place to respond to everyday trauma. I think that not only is trauma something that is extraordinary at times, but also it is becoming more a part of ordinary everyday life. We're living through incredibly stressful times, politically, socially, environmentally. And I think that the more trauma resilient we are, then the more effectively we can respond to the world around us and take action to be part of the solution. Becoming too traumatized to be able to respond effectively or to engage, we're seeing real costs of that. We're seeing real costs of what happens when we are too overwhelmed to engage in things like the political process. If you want to have more tools and practices in your arsenal, If you would like to learn about ways that you can heal yourself and heal each other, it's going to be a group class, then I would love to get you on the waitlist for that. So I will also include a link in the show notes where you can join the waitlist to get notified when that class goes live. I will be offering the first beta test of that class at a lower price point so that I can have a chance to test out the material and you can have a chance to have early access to it and also be a part of the group that helps me to shape the class for later sessions. Again, link in the show notes if you want to know more about that. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope this was helpful. I would love to hear from you if it was. Let me know what sparked something for you, and I will talk to you again soon. Take care. Tending the Soul is produced by Maggie Hollenbeck, all rights reserved. Music is by Dimitro Kuvalin from Pixabay. Thanks, Dimitro. Episodes will drop about twice a month, so if you like what you hear, you know what to do. Follow, subscribe, review, and share. You'll find more of my work at my home on Substack. Go to maggiehollenbeck.substack.com or click the link in the show notes. You can subscribe for free or choose a paid plan to become a part of my community with monthly care packages and live gatherings. Love that you stopped by, and I hope you'll make it a habit. Bye for now.